Hi there. Daron Acemoglu, I hope I'm saying it correctly, didn't mince words. If we go down this path of destroying jobs and creating more inequality, US democracy is not going to survive. The Nobel laureate told Fortune last week. Coming from anyone else, that might sound like hyperbole. Coming from the economist who has spent decades proving how extractive institutions hollow out nations from within, it sounds like a diagnosis. And that's what it is, a diagnosis, a precise and devastating one. But a diagnosis is not a cure. I've spent 36 years on the manufacturing floor, from General Motors to Mercedes Benz, from Royal Enfield in Chennai to a stormwater pipe plant in Worcester, Ohio. I have watched the disease Acemoglu describes unfold not in GDP charts or Gini coefficients, but in the eyes of workers whose intelligence is systematically suppressed shift after shift, year after year. I have seen what extraction looks like when it wears a hard hat. And I believe the cure requires two steps, not one. Acemoglu's life work, crystallized in why nations fail, rests on a single powerful distinction. Inclusive institutions create prosperity, extractive institutions destroy it. Nations don't fail because of geography or culture or bad luck. They fail because their institutions are designed to concentrate power and wealth in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. Now he turns that lens on AI, and the picture is grim. American companies tallied 1.2 million layoffs in 2025, up 58% from the prior year. More than 50,000 were directly attributed to AI. The pursuit of artificial general intelligence, he argues, is a misguided agenda with adverse social consequences. His prescription: address wealth inequality and stop the wholesale destruction of jobs. He advocates for a pro worker AI agenda that uses technology as complement, not replacement. I agree with every word, but I also know that complementarity requires something to complement. And that's where the American system has a problem it hasn't reckoned with. So, step one is deploy the intelligence you already have. So, before we can talk about how AI should augment workers, we have to ask an uncomfortable question. Have we actually developed those workers in the first place to the full extent of their capability? I'll answer you with a walk. Walk with me through Sindelfingen, Germany. A young man named Lucas finishes school at 16 and enters the dual track Ausbildung system, and I came in close contact with it in my time in Germany. For 42 months, he splits time 70% at the plant, 30% at technical school. He learns under a certified master trainer who has passed a separate pedagogical qualification to teach. At 19, he passes the Geselling-Prüfung, his journeyman's exam. He works for 4 years, building mastery across different stations and departments. At 26, he passes the Meisterprüfung, a four-part examination covering practical expertise, theoretical knowledge, business management, and the ability to train others. Just as a point of reflection, I was about 26, 27 when I finished my PhD. At 30, Lucas has accumulated approximately 25,000 hours of combined training and practical application. He reads engineering drawings, interprets statistical process data, diagnoses failures across multiple systems, trains the next generation of apprentices, and improves processes nobody asked him to improve. He carries organizational intelligence no AI system can replicate. The memory of what was tried in 2019, what failed in 2021, why the data from 2023 is misleading, and what the spec sheet will never tell you about how that particular machine behaves on humid days. Now, walk with me through a typical American manufacturing plant. A worker is hired, given a few days of orientation, and placed on the line. Training is minimal, narrowly task specific. There's no structured progression, no master apprentice relationship, no system for developing judgment over years. You're going to argue with me and say skilled trades. But that's a small fraction of our workforce. The worker's native intelligence, pattern recognition, contextual reasoning, the problem solving instinct built from lived experience, it's never cultivated. It isn't even acknowledged as an asset. So here's the question Acemoglu's diagnosis demands. When will America create its own Lucas? Not in the occasional apprenticeship program. And General Motors' 242 million investment in skilled trades is admirable, but it's the exception proving the rule. I mean, systematically, when will our country decide that the 70% of its workforce without a 4-year degree deserves the same structured investment in human capability that Germany has treated as foundational for generations? So, this is step one of the cure. And it has nothing to do with AI. It has to do with whether we believe frontline workers possess intelligence worth developing in the first place. If we don't invest in deploying that native intelligence through a fundamentally reimagined approach to vocational education and on the job development, then no amount of AI policy will save us. You cannot complement something you never bothered to build. So, step two, amplify, don't replace. Only after step one is underway does the AI question become meaningful. And here, Acemoglu and I land in exactly the same place. His formulation is precise. Watch his words. The best way to use something that's different from you is not to use it to replace yourself, but to use it in a complementary way. That's the right principle. But complementarity looks very different when applied to a fully developed Lucas versus an undertrained American worker who was never given the chance to develop in the first place. Give Lucas an AI powered diagnostic tool, and he doesn't just follow its recommendations, he interrogates them. He knows what the sensor data can't capture. He knows which historical patterns the algorithm was never trained on. He uses AI the way a master craftsman uses any tool, as an extension of judgment he has spent years developing. The technology amplifies his intelligence because there is intelligence to amplify. Give the same tool to a worker whose capabilities were never developed, and something very different happens. The AI does not augment the worker, it replaces the worker's judgment entirely. The human becomes a button pusher carrying out algorithmic instructions, and the business case for eliminating that role becomes trivially easy to make. This is the trap the American economy is walking into, and is exactly the extractive dynamic Acemoglu has spent his career warning about. AI doesn't create extraction, it accelerates whatever institutional logic is already in place. In a system that develops people, AI amplifies human capability. In a system that neglects people, AI makes them disposable. So, Acemoglu's great insight is that prosperity depends on institutions, not resources, not technology, not geography. The modern American factory is itself an institution, and by his own framework, most of them are, sadly, extractive ones. Think about what extraction looks like in practice. A worker with 15 or 20 years of experience, someone who can hear a bearing failing before any sensor detects it, who knows exactly why line 3 jams on humid days, who has solved the same problem 6 different ways, is treated as a cost to be minimized. Their intelligence is not deployed, it is not developed, it is suppressed because the system was designed for compliance, not contribution. I once spent months working night shifts at a GM assembly plant, not as a manager, but as an observer, specifically to understand how this suppression operates. What I found was not malice, it was architecture. The system itself was built to extract labor while ignoring intelligence. The workers knew it. They had simply stopped offering what no one wanted to receive. This is Acemoglu's extractive institution, wearing steel toed boots. And it connects directly to his warning about democracy. When a worker spends 20 years in a system that tells them daily that their thinking is irrelevant, that lesson doesn't stay at the plant gate. It follows them into every civic space where participation requires the belief that you have something worth offering. Acemoglu is right that the current trajectory threatens democracy. But the solution is not only about how we regulate AI or tax wealth, essential as those policies may be. The solution begins upstream in a 2 step sequence that America has never seriously attempted. Step one, invest in deploying the native intelligence of frontline workers, not through sporadic training programs, but through a systematic, systemic commitment to human development on par with what Germany achieves through its Ausbildung system. Reimagine vocational education. Build structured pathways from entry to mastery. Treat every worker's 86 billion neurons as what they are. The highest return investment any manufacturer will ever make. Create the Lucas. Step two, introduce AI as an amplifier of that developed capability, not as a replacement for judgment that was never cultivated, but as a tool in the hands of workers whose intelligence has been fully activated. This is where Acemoglu's complementarity principle actually works. When there is genuine human capability for the technology to complement. Combine the 2 steps, and you have something transformative. Not just a pro worker AI agenda, but a pro intelligence economy. An inclusive institution in Acemoglu's precise sense of the term. One that invests in its people and then gives them tools to multiply their contribution. And this is what the Capability Capital Institute is being built to scale. This is what my forthcoming book, already paid for, Why Unlocking Frontline Intelligence Beats Automating Workers Away, lays out in operational detail, not theory, practice. Built from decades of doing exactly this in plants around the world and watching it work every time. Acemoglu arrives at complementarity through decades of institutional economics. I arrive at it through decades of watching what happens when you actually invest in people doing the work. We come from different directions, but we land in the same place. The replacement agenda is not just economically wasteful, it is institutionally suicidal. The Nobel laureate has given us the most credible possible warning. The question now is not whether he's right, it's whether we have the courage to build the cure, starting not in a Senate chamber, but on the shop floor. The workers are already in the building. Their intelligence is already paid for. All that remains is the will to deploy it. Thank you.